I only saw one of her legs and part of her abdomen. Her second leg was missing. She had no arms and no head. Just part of her body remained. I tried to take her away and they started to shoot at me. I just covered her with a blanket so the dogs wouldn't eat her body.
Over the last month, every single person we talked to who survived Mosul, who managed to get out, either knows someone who was killed in an airstrike or can point you to a house destroyed by an airstrike. The casualties we're hearing about, the casualties that the Iraqi military, the US-led coalition are talking about, are just a fraction of the total.
I saw a missile and on it was written that it was made in the USA. All of this was caused by US airstrikes. Our house, our neighbor's house, and so on. In one building alone, more than 140 people were killed. And just in front of our home, there were more than 30 victims. This is a genocide. I don't know how else you could describe this.
In terms of civilian casualties, Mosul is already one of the deadliest battles in recent history. In decades, the United States has even called it one of the bloodiest battles, urban battles, since World War II. And unless something changes, unless more precautions are taken, many more civilians are going to die. And the number of innocents killed is going to grow much, much bigger.
Now, videos have emerged from Syria claiming to show victims of a chemical attack on a militant-held town. We can show you one of them now, although we cannot independently verify its authenticity. The incident reportedly took place in Idlib province in the north of the country. And activist groups with links to militants claim at least 69 people were killed. The Russian Defense Ministry has commented on the incident, saying Syrian government warplanes struck an arms warehouse used by terrorists containing chemical weapons. The UN Special Envoy for Syria, as well as the EU's foreign policy chief, have pointed out there's not yet enough information to draw any solid conclusions.
We have no yet any official or reliable confirmation. We have been and we will be stimulating all those who have the capacity of finding out technically what it happened, and we have been asking, and the UN is going to ask, and I'm sure there will be also at the Security Council a meeting on this, for clear identification of responsibilities and accountability.
We also do not have evidence at the moment, and obviously the European Union and the United Nations and the entire international community, especially as we gather here in these days on Syria, we share whatever we can share in terms of information.
But despite the lack of verified information, the Western media were quick to point the finger at the Syrian government and Russia.
The group is saying either Syrian government or Russian planes carried out the bombing in Idlib.
And we have seen a pattern of Assad and his allies using indiscriminate attacks against civilian targets.
While news agency Reuters, which at first ran with a similar narrative, has since had a change of heart and altered its article. Furthermore, details of the attack were then released in a statement from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, whose credibility was recently questioned by Germany's foreign ministry.
The Syrian Observatory is not located on the ground, but is based in London. They have access to a good network in Syria, but not everything which is reported there appears to be as they say. I mean, the observatory should take into consideration that there are parties with certain interests which report some things in the way they want it to be reported.
Now, critics have also pointed out that the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is run by one man. Though the German foreign ministry confused his location, he actually lives outside of London in Coventry. The Russian Defense Ministry says Syrian government warplanes have struck an arms warehouse used by terrorists containing chemical weapons. The building was bombed on Tuesday in northwest Syria. The Defense Ministry issued the following statement.
Syrian warplanes have struck a large arms and ammunition depot used by terrorists. The building contained facilities for the production of chemical weapons, which were delivered to Iraq. Identical chemical weapons were previously used in the Syrian city of Aleppo.
While U.S. President Donald Trump, meantime, was categorical in blaming the Syrian government for the incident. Commenting on the news about the alleged chemical attack, he accused not only the Syrian leader, but also Barack Obama. Fresh accusations come after a change in tone by the Trump administration on the Syrian government. RT's Caleb Maupin explains.
We've got a lot of important issues. Assad's not going away, but we're not going to stop beating up on him.
Now, that might sound subtle, but actually it's huge. For the last 6 years, the U.S. has been demanding that the Syrian government be toppled.
The regime of Bashar al-Assad must come to an end.
Assad has to go.
It's time for Assad to get out of the way.
It is time for Bashar to go.
Assad needs to go.
Not anymore. Haley's words have been echoed by other figures in the Trump administration.
With respect to Assad, I mean, there is a political reality that we have to accept.
I think the status and the longer term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people.
What? Letting the Syrian people decide their own future? Now that's something that's unthinkable for certain people on Capitol Hill.
Now we're going to turn our backs on these people? What about the thousands we have trained and equipped? What about those people? What signal do we send people who struggle for freedom around the world? That Syria is determining its own future?
Now, reports of a chemical attack in the Idlib province have surfaced amid a change in the attitude of the United States. Damascus denies even possessing these weapons, but many have jumped to conclusions before any investigation has even begun.
If this were proved to have been committed by the Assad regime, then it would be another reason to think they're an absolutely heinous outfit that is it is a war crime.
Bashar al-Assad counts on the complicity of his allies to act with impunity.
It was the regime.
It'll be interesting to see if the old Assad must go mantra will now make a comeback. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
And let's now cross live to Sriram Chowdhury, professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Thanks so much, Mr. Chowdhury, for joining us here in RT. Now, the UN says there is not yet enough information to draw any solid conclusions. Now, what do you make of the mainstream media and their reaction, where it is so quick to make a decision on who's to blame?
Well, I think it shows a lack of deeper intelligence and honesty on their part, because first of all, one needs to dissect the timing of this attack in Idlib. I mean, this happened at a time when United States and most of European allies had already resigned to the fact that they had to work with Bashar al-Assad, and they were saying that it's a political reality and we have to go along with him, and he's part of whatever the future is. And then suddenly this attack happens. I mean, why, if Assad was rational, why would he even do something like this to spoil his own chances of being accepted by all the major parties to the conflict? So it looks like to me that this has occurred to kind of scupper any kind of long-term solution that would defeat ISIS. So this seems to be like a major false flag operation, or at least some kind of an attempt to kind of create the old animosity towards the Assad regime and towards Russia, so that the same old pattern can continue, which is to say that they are the problems and we have to get them out first, and which means that there is no resolution to this war at all. So I think the mainstream media must show greater sense of perspective, and which they have not. They've jumped immediately onto this blame Russia and blame Syria, because that's how they are able to keep up the old argument that, and the old structure which has perpetuated this conflict.
Well, as we reported earlier, some rebel groups had already been accused of committing chemical weapons attacks. So why do you think this version is not being considered by Western media?
Well, the point is that the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons had certified that 95% of the chemical weapons arsenal declared by the Assad regime had already been removed. So it's hard to imagine how they would still have so much gases to attack on such a scale, which has happened in Idlib. It looks more likely that something was on the ground rather than being dropped from above. And therefore, the question remains as to what is the motivation. And remember, who are these rebel groups on the ground? I mean, this is Al-Qaeda and affiliated hardcore jihadists and terrorist groups. I mean, these are not so-called moderate rebels whatsoever. So therefore, the question remains as to what are the intentions. Al-Qaeda in the past historically has always tried to acquire chemical and biological weapons to be used in war, and who is supporting them and who are really the shadowy forces behind them. All this needs to be uncovered before, you know, pinpointing at one side or the other. So I think it's important that the, you know, Western governments, there's been a change in Washington, and that's been for the better as far as Syria goes, because they see Assad as relevant, and also Russia is important and necessary for reaching a solution. So although President Trump has kind of assigned the blame, I would still be hopeful that he will not succumb to the Washington bureaucracy and the Cold War hawks who have been trying to revive the old logic that Assad is to blame and that Russia is giving him blank check. I think what needs to be shown is who is to blame and who are the ones behind these terrorist groups that are out there that are still operating in Idlib, you know, with impunity. And also the
Certainly
question of
very big questions there, Shriram. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, so we'll just have to leave it there. But thanks so much for talking to us and sharing with us your thoughts on this particular situation. Shriram Chalia, professor of Jindal School of International Affairs.